This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my son could have a good future. I thought when I grew old, he would show me love and care. But one afternoon, he tied a rope around my waist and dragged me across the yard like I was nothing. He laughed while I lay in the dirt, my body aching, my heart breaking. That day, I lost my son. But I did not lose my power. You won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I was born into a life of struggle. My family had nothing but their hands and their strength, and from the time I was young, I knew what it meant to work. When I became a father, I made a promise to myself that my son would not suffer as I did. I wanted him to have a roof over his head, food on his plate, shoes on his feet, and books in his bag. I wanted him to grow up without the pain of hunger, without the shame of poverty. So I gave everything I had, every bit of strength, every coin, every dream, to make his life better. I worked long days and longer nights. I carried heavy loads when my back already ached. I bent in the fields under the hot sun and stood in the cold winds when others were sleeping. I took jobs that paid little but demanded much because little by little I was building something bigger. While other men spent their wages on drink or pleasure, I saved every coin I could. My son's school fees came first. His clothes came first. His health came first. I placed myself last, always. If there was enough food for only one of us, I gave it to him. If there was enough money for one pair of shoes, I bought them for him and walked barefoot myself. Every step I took in life was for him. I dreamed of his future like it was my own. I imagined him as a man respected by others, a man who would stand tall because his father had built a strong foundation beneath him. I worked to make sure he would never feel the sting of shame I had known. I wanted him to walk into school with his head high, not worried about torn clothes or empty pockets. I wanted him to feel proud when people asked, "Whose son are you?" I built a home with my own hands, brick by brick, nail by nail. I remember the sweat dripping down my face as I worked, my hands bleeding from carrying wood and stone. But I kept going because I knew that inside those walls, my boy would be safe. I fixed the roof so rain would not touch him. I dug the well so water would always be near for him. I planted trees so one day he could sit in their shade. Every corner of that home was built out of sacrifice. When he was sick as a child, I stayed awake at night, praying and holding him close. When he cried, I wiped his tears. When he fell, I lifted him. I carried him on my shoulders so his little feet would not grow tired. I gave him every piece of my strength and every ounce of my love. And even when my body ached from long days of work, seeing his smile made me forget the pain. When he started school, I worked extra hours to buy him books and uniforms. I wanted him to have a chance at an education, a chance I never had. I believed that knowledge would open doors for him that were forever closed to me. Every exam fee, every school trip, every extra lesson, if he needed it, I found a way to pay. I sold things I needed, I skipped meals, I ignored my own needs, but I never let him go without. As he grew older, I made sure he never felt small among other boys. I bought him decent clothes so he would walk proudly. I saved to buy him a bicycle so he would not feel left behind when his friends rode together. I gave him money in his pocket, even if it meant my pocket was empty. I wanted him to feel cared for, to feel secure, to know that his father was there for him always. I told myself that in my old age, when my hair turned white and my hands trembled, he would repay my love with love. I dreamed that he would sit beside me, listen to me, care for me. I thought my sacrifice would not be wasted, that my years of toil would not be forgotten. I believed respect was something that grew naturally from love, and I believed my son loved me. Every nail I hammered, every coin I saved, every drop of sweat that fell from my forehead was for him. I built not just a home, but a future. I thought my reward would be his kindness when I was old, his respect when I was weak, his hand reaching out when mine could no longer hold steady. I thought I was building not just wealth, but a bond between father and son. I was wrong. The dream I carried for so many years shattered the day he tied that rope around my waist. As I lay in the dirt, dragged across the same yard where I once carried him in my arms, I realized my sacrifice had not grown into love. It had grown into entitlement. I had raised not a son, but a master who thought I was his servant. My sacrifices had not made him kind, they had made him cruel. My love had not softened his heart, it had hardened it. And in that moment of humiliation, I saw my life's truth clearly. All my sacrifice was real, but his gratitude was not. Cruelty does not always come suddenly. It grows little by little, like weeds in a garden, until one day it covers everything. With my son, the cruelty began in small ways. At first, I told myself not to worry. I thought, he is young, he does not mean it. He will change. But with every year, the small signs grew stronger, and I could no longer hide from the truth. It started with his tone. When he was younger, he used to call me father with warmth. Later, he said it with impatience, as if the word itself was heavy on his tongue. When I asked him for help carrying something, he sighed loudly, rolling his eyes before moving. When I asked him to sit and talk, he said he was too busy. These were not yet insults, but they were not love either. They were cracks in the wall of respect. Then came the jokes. He began to make fun of my slow walk. "Father, do you need a stick already?" He laughed when my knees trembled on the stairs. At first I forced myself to smile, thinking he was only joking. But jokes said again and again are no longer jokes. They are truths dressed in laughter. His friends joined in sometimes, laughing when he mocked the way my hands shook while drinking tea. I felt my dignity slipping away, piece by piece. Later, he stopped listening to me altogether. When I tried to give advice, he interrupted, saying, "That was your time, old man." "Things are different now, old man." That is what he called me, not father. The word was sharp, cutting me deeper than any knife. My sacrifices, my years of labor, my love, all of it reduced to old man. I noticed he no longer wanted me near him when others were around. At family gatherings, he kept his distance. If I tried to sit beside him, he stood up and moved. When people asked me questions, he cut in and answered for me, as if my words were worthless. Respect that once flowed naturally had dried up completely. I was alive, but in his eyes, I was invisible. Then came the commands. He no longer asked me for things, he ordered them. "Do this. Bring that. Stay there." The son I had raised with love now spoke to me as if I were a servant in his house. And still, I stayed silent. I told myself, he will realize one day. He will remember all I did for him. He will come back to kindness. But kindness never came. Impatience grew into anger. If I walked too slowly, he shouted, "Move faster." If I forgot something, he barked, "Can't you even remember this?" My ears grew used to his harsh words, but my heart never did. Every insult cut fresh. Every shout echoed in my chest long after his voice went silent. There were days when I sat in my chair quietly, hoping he would speak gently, hoping he would remember that I was his father. But instead, he laughed at my silence. "Look at him," he told his friends. "He doesn't even speak anymore. Maybe he's losing his mind." They all laughed, and I lowered my eyes so they would not see my tears. Sometimes I remembered the little boy who once held my hand tightly, afraid to cross the street. I remembered the boy who cried in my arms when he fell and scraped his knee. I remembered the boy who hugged me after school, showing me his good marks. And I asked myself, where did that boy go? How did he become this man who now mocks me? The answer was painful. The boy I raised was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. But I still held on to hope, even then. I told myself he was young, that he would change as he grew older. I told myself time would soften him. I told myself love would return. I was wrong. The cruelty only grew. It started with words, then moved into laughter, then into commands. And soon, it would turn into something worse, something I never thought my own son would do. The day he tied the rope around my waist did not come out of nowhere. It was the fruit of years of disrespect, watered by arrogance and fed by my silence. If I had seen the signs clearly from the start, perhaps I would have acted sooner. But a father's heart is blind to his child's faults. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to see only the good. And so, I ignored the weeds until they grew into thorns. The first signs of cruelty were enough to break my heart, but I told myself I could endure. I told myself I could bear the insults, the laughter, the sharp words. I thought I had already tasted the worst of his disrespect. But I was wrong. The worst was yet to come. The day that broke me came on a hot afternoon. The sun was bright, the air dry, and I sat quietly in the yard, trying to rest my weak legs. I had been feeling tired all morning, my body slow and aching, but I still wanted to be outside. The yard was a place of memories for me. I remembered planting trees there with my young hands, building a small fence, watching my son play as a boy. That yard was once full of laughter and hope. But on that afternoon, it became the place of my greatest humiliation. My son came outside with a rope in his hands. At first, I thought he was going to use it for work, maybe to tie something in the shed. But when his eyes met mine, I saw no kindness, no love. I saw only cruelty. His lips curled into a smirk. Without a word, he walked over and threw the rope around my waist. I was too shocked to react. My weak hands tried to push it away, but he pulled it tight. The rough fibers bit into my skin, pressing hard against my old bones. "Stand up," he barked. But before I could even move, he yanked the rope. My body jerked forward. My knees scraped against the dirt. I stumbled, fell, and before I could rise, he pulled again. My frail body slid across the ground, dry earth scratching my arms, stones bruising my skin. I cried out, but he did not stop. He laughed, a deep, cruel laugh. "Now you know how weak you've become," he shouted. Each pull dragged me farther across the yard. The rope burned my waist, tearing the skin beneath my clothes. Dust filled my mouth. My chest pounded with fear and pain. I tried to grab the ground with my hands, but my strength was gone. I was not a man in that moment. I was not his father. I was nothing but a burden being dragged like useless weight. Neighbors stood at their windows. Some gasped, some whispered, but none stepped forward. They watched as an old man was humiliated by his own son. I could feel their eyes on me, and the shame was heavier than the rope itself. I wanted the earth to swallow me whole so I would not have to see their faces. My son did not care. His laughter echoed through the air. "Look at him," he yelled to anyone who might be listening. "The old man cannot even stand. He is nothing." Those words cut deeper than the rope. They stripped me of dignity, of respect, of everything I had built my life upon. My son, the boy I raised with my blood and sweat, was treating me worse than an animal. Finally, he let go of the rope, dropping it carelessly, as if he had finished some game. My body lay in the dirt, shaking. My clothes were torn, my waist raw, my knees bleeding. My breath came heavy, each inhale a struggle. He stood over me for a moment, smiling with pride, as if he had proven something. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me there in the dust like garbage. As I lay there, I felt the sharp pain of my wounds, but the pain in my heart was sharper. I thought of the times I had carried him in my arms when he was too tired to walk. I thought of the nights I had rocked him to sleep when he was sick. I thought of the day I had lifted him onto my shoulders so he could see the world from higher ground. And now, the same son who once trusted me with his small body had tied a rope around mine and dragged me like I was nothing. Tears filled my eyes, but I did not let them fall. My body was broken, but my spirit was still awake. In that moment of cruelty, I understood the truth I had avoided for too long. My son did not see me as his father anymore. He did not see me as a man who had sacrificed everything for him. He saw me only as a weak old man standing in the way of what he wanted. His heart was cold, his respect gone, his love dead. The cruel act was not just about the rope. It was about everything behind it. It was about years of disrespect, years of mockery, years of pride that had poisoned his soul. The rope was only the final proof that he no longer saw me as human. As I lay there in the dirt, I made a silent promise to myself. He had dragged me like I was nothing, but I would not leave this world as nothing. He had tied me down with a rope, but I still held something he had forgotten: power. And I would use that power. Not with anger, not with fists, but with decisions that would cut deeper than any rope ever could. I lay in the dirt for a long time after he dropped the rope. My body hurt, but my heart hurt more. The rope burns across my waist, stung with every breath. My knees bled from being scraped against the stones, and my arms shook when I tried to lift myself. But worse than all the wounds was the silence around me. Neighbors had seen what happened. Some peeked through their windows, some whispered to each other, but no one came to help me. I was alone in the yard, an old man dragged across the ground by his own son. The silence was heavy, heavier than the rope itself. I looked at the sky and thought of the times I had carried my boy in my arms across this same yard. I remembered when he was little and too tired to walk, and I would lift him onto my shoulders, holding him gently so his small hands would not slip. I remembered when he fell once and cried, and I carried him carefully across the yard, whispering that everything would be all right. Those memories clashed with the present moment, where the same boy had tied a rope around my waist and dragged me without care. My love had been answered with cruelty. My gentleness had been repaid with laughter. As I lay there, shame washed over me. I could almost hear the whispers of neighbors. Look at him, dragged by his own son. I could imagine their pity, their disgust, their disbelief. I was no longer a respected father. I was the subject of gossip, of judgment, of mockery. For an old man, dignity is all that remains when strength is gone, and that dignity had been crushed into the dirt along with my body. Slowly, I pushed myself up, my hands trembling as they pressed against the ground. My back ached, my chest heaved, but I managed to sit. I looked at the rope lying in the dust beside me. It was just a piece of fiber, yet it felt like chains around my heart. It was proof that I had raised a son who saw me not as a father, but as an object, something to be dragged and discarded. I touched the raw skin on my waist and felt the sting. That pain was real, but the deeper wound was invisible, the wound of betrayal. Inside the house, I could hear him laughing again, as if nothing had happened. His voice was loud, careless, cruel. Every laugh was another cut to my heart. I wanted to stand and shout, to remind him of all I had done, of all I had given. I wanted to cry out, "I am your father." But the words stuck in my throat. I knew he would not listen. He no longer saw me as a father. He no longer cared for my voice. So I stayed silent. I carried my pain in silence. I carried my shame in silence. The world did not hear me cry, but inside, my soul screamed. My silence was not weakness. It was the last thread of my dignity. If he would not respect my words, I would save them. If he would not honor my presence, I would hold myself apart from him. My silence became my shield. That night, as I lay in bed, every movement hurt. The rope burns throbbed, my knees ached, my back felt like fire. But worse was the replay in my mind. Again and again, I saw myself being dragged across the yard, his laughter echoing. Again and again, I remembered the neighbor's eyes on me. Again and again, I felt the shame of lying helpless in the dirt. I turned on my side and closed my eyes, but the image did not leave. It stayed, carved into me like a scar that would never heal. In my heart, I knew something had changed forever. A son may argue with his father. A son may make mistakes. But a son who ties a rope around his father and drags him across the yard has crossed a line that cannot be crossed back. The bond of blood had been broken. Love had been replaced with cruelty. Respect had been replaced with mockery. And once broken, those things cannot return. I whispered to myself in the darkness, "This is the end of hope." For years, I had hoped he would change. For years, I had endured his sharp words and his mocking laughter, telling myself that one day he would remember love. But the rope was proof that there was no love left. The rope was proof that I was no longer his father in his eyes. I was only an old man he could humiliate for his own pride. And so, my silence turned into resolve. I would not beg him for kindness anymore. I would not wait for him to remember respect. I would not let him drag my dignity again. He had tied me down with a rope, but I still had something he could not touch. My choices. He had mocked me in front of others, but I still had power he had forgotten. The power of law, the power of legacy, the power to decide his future. That night, as I closed my eyes, I felt the sting of the rope, the ache of my body, and the weight of my silence. But deep inside, a new strength began to rise. He thought he had dragged me down, but in truth, he had pushed me to rise higher than ever before, not with anger, but with justice. My son thought that by dragging me across the yard, he had proved his strength. He thought the rope in his hands made him powerful, and the dirt on my clothes made me weak. He believed youth gave him control, and age left me helpless. But he had forgotten something important, something bigger than muscles or ropes. He had forgotten that real power is not in the hands that pull, it is in the name that owns. And everything he enjoyed in life still belonged to me. The house he lived in was mine. The land under his feet was mine. The shop that brought in money was mine. The account at the bank, the savings from all my years of labor, were mine. Even the very yard where he dragged me like a sack of grain still carried my name on its papers. My son may have tied a rope around my waist, but in truth, it was I who held the rope around his future. He had grown blind with arrogance. He thought old age meant weakness, but old age also meant wisdom. He thought silence meant defeat, but silence also meant planning. He thought cruelty would go unpunished, but cruelty leaves scars that speak louder than any words. He forgot that the man he dragged across the dirt was the same man who held the keys to everything he dreamed of inheriting. I sat quietly in the days after, watching him move through the house as if he already owned it. He barked orders, he boasted to his friends, he mocked me with careless words. He believed the world was already his. But while he played the master, I remembered the lawyer who once told me, "As long as you live, nothing changes without your will." Those words returned to me like fire in the dark. I was still the owner. I was still the one whose signature mattered. And as long as my hand could hold a pen, my son's arrogance was nothing but air. He forgot that respect is a condition of inheritance. He forgot that gratitude is the price of legacy. He thought blood alone would secure his future. But blood without love is empty. Blood without honor is poison. And I decided I would not let poison carry my name into the future. I thought of the rope burns around my waist. They were red and raw, marks of shame that no father should ever carry. But to me, they became symbols of something else too. They reminded me that he had tied himself, not me. By humiliating me, he had tied a rope around his own future. By dragging me, he had dragged his own fate into the dirt. By laughing at me, he had laughed away every chance he had left to be my heir. He believed strength was in youth, but strength was in control. He believed power was in his hands, but power was in my decisions. He believed the future was his, but the future was still mine to give, or to take. He had forgotten all of this, but I had not. So I began to think not as a broken old man, but as the owner of his tomorrow. I thought of the land, and who would respect it. I thought of the shop, and who would work it with honesty. I thought of my savings, and who would use them with care. And I thought of my son, and I realized he deserved nothing. He had proven himself unworthy not only as a son, but as a man. Neighbors whispered about what he had done. Some pitied me, but others shook their heads and said, "The old man still holds the papers." The son forgets that they were right. Papers are stronger than ropes. Ink lasts longer than bruises. And respect is worth more than laughter. My son had none of these things, and so he had nothing at all. Each night as I lay in bed, I looked at the scars on my waist and reminded myself, he thinks I am powerless, but he is the powerless one. He is waiting for a future that will never come. He is building dreams on a foundation I have already taken away. He thinks I will forget, but I will never forget. He thinks I will forgive, but forgiveness cannot erase cruelty this deep. And so, while he laughed and bragged, I stayed silent. My silence was not weakness. It was strength he could not see. He thought he had broken me. In truth, he had awakened me. He had reminded me of the power he had forgotten, the power of choice, the power of law, the power of legacy. He thought the rope in his hands made him strong. But I held the pen, and the pen would cut the rope that tied him to his future. That night, after the cruel act, I sat alone in my room. My body ached from the rope burns, but the pain inside my chest was worse. I could hear my son's laughter outside, careless, loud, as if nothing had happened. He did not know that every sound of his laughter was like a knife cutting into me. I sat in the dim light, staring at my hands. These were the same hands that once built a home, worked in fields, and carried him when he was too small to walk. These were the same hands that wiped his tears when he cried, that fed him when he was hungry. Now those hands shook with age, but they still held something powerful. They still held choice. I asked myself many questions. Could I forgive him? Could I forget what he had done? Could I still give him my inheritance, knowing he had tied me like an animal and dragged me through the dirt? My heart wanted to believe in love. My heart wanted to think that maybe one day he would change. But my mind knew the truth. A son who could treat his father like that did not deserve forgiveness, and he did not deserve a future built on my sacrifice. I sat in silence for hours, thinking of every year I had given him. I thought of the food I had placed on his plate, the books I had bought for his education, the clothes I had sewn to keep him warm. I thought of the shop, the land, the house, everything I had built for him. And I realized, giving him my inheritance would not be love. It would be betrayal. Betrayal of myself. Betrayal of my years of labor. Betrayal of every principle I lived by. That was when my pain hardened into resolve. I decided that night that my son would receive nothing from me. No money, no land, no shop, no comfort, nothing. I decided that I would cut him off completely, as he had cut me off from respect and love. I told myself, better strangers benefit from my work than a son who mocks me. I would give my legacy to people who valued dignity, people who would carry my name with honor, not shame. The more I thought about it, the stronger my resolve grew. I remembered the charity in town that fed poor children. I remembered the neighbor who always greeted me with kindness, who offered to carry my bags even when I refused. I remembered the worker in my shop who stayed loyal for years, never stealing, never speaking with arrogance. These people respected me more than my own blood. If anyone deserved to share my legacy, it was them, not my cruel son. I also decided something else. Cruelty should not only be punished by inheritance, it should be punished by law. My son thought he could drag me like an animal and walk away laughing, but I would not stay silent. I would not hide my wounds. I would let the law see the rope burns, the bruises, the proof of his cruelty. I would show the world that an old man still has a voice. I decided that I would go to the police. I would report my own son. I knew people would talk. I knew neighbors would gossip, but dignity mattered more than whispers. I had suffered enough humiliation in silence. Now it was time for truth. The decision was not made in anger. It was made in clarity. I did not want revenge with blood. I wanted justice with law. I did not want his suffering for my pleasure. I wanted his suffering to teach him the lesson he had refused to learn. Respect is not a choice, it is a duty. That night, as I lay in bed, my body burning with pain, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I was not confused. I was not torn between love and disappointment. I was firm. I had chosen my path. My son had tied me with a rope, but I had untied myself with resolve. He had dragged me in the dirt, but I would rise with dignity. He thought I was powerless, but I had shown myself that I still had the power to decide his future. The decision was final. My son would not inherit my wealth. He would not inherit my name. He would not inherit my peace. Instead, he would inherit the weight of his own actions. He would inherit the judgment of the law. He would inherit the emptiness of a future he thought was guaranteed. And when that day came, he would finally understand what he had thrown away. A decision without action is only a thought. I knew if I wanted my son to feel the weight of what he had done, I had to act. So the next morning, I gathered my strength, washed my face, and dressed myself. My body still hurt from the rope burns and bruises, but my spirit was stronger than it had ever been. I walked slowly, leaning on my stick, and made my way to the lawyer's office. Each step I took felt heavy, but it also felt right. I was carrying not only my pain, but also my resolve. When I entered the office, the lawyer looked up in surprise. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked. I pulled back my shirt slightly and showed him the rope marks around my waist. His eyes widened in shock. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. I only said, "My own son." He lowered his eyes in sadness, but he understood why I was there. I told him, in a calm voice, that I wanted to change everything. I wanted my will rewritten, my deeds secured, my accounts protected. My son's name was to be removed from everything. The lawyer began his work. He spread the papers before me, papers that carried my entire life's worth, my land, my house, my shop, my savings. Line by line, he wrote the changes. Beneficiaries were chosen with care. I named the charity that fed poor children because they gave respect to old men who came with even small gifts. I named the neighbor who had always shown me kindness, who brought food when I was sick, who treated me like family. I named the worker from my shop, a man loyal and honest, who never raised his voice at me even when times were hard. To these people, I gave what my son no longer deserved. When the time came, the lawyer slid the will across the table. My hands shook, but not from doubt. I took the pen, pressed it against the paper, and signed. Every stroke was heavy, but it was also freeing. With each signature, I cut another rope that tied my son to my future. The rope he had used against me became the rope I used against him, but mine was made of law, not cruelty. When it was done, the lawyer looked at me and said, "This cannot be undone unless you choose to change it again. Do you want this final?" I looked at him with tired but steady eyes and answered, "Final." He nodded, sealed the papers, and filed them where no hand but mine could touch them. I left his office lighter. The air felt different on my skin, like a burden had been lifted. For years, I had carried the fear of what would happen to my legacy if I died. I had feared leaving everything in the hands of a cruel son. But now, that fear was gone. I had secured my work. I had secured my dignity. My son could drag me across the yard 100 times, but he would never drag a coin, a deed, or a piece of land from my hands. That evening, I returned home. My son was sitting with his friends, laughing loudly, bragging again about the future he thought was his. "When my father goes," he told them, "I will own the land, the house, the shop. Everything will be mine." His friends nodded, impressed. I stood quietly in the doorway, listening. I wanted to laugh, but I stayed silent. If only he knew the truth, that while he laughed, the law had already cut him off completely. His future was already gone, taken away by the same man he mocked. The next day, I took the second step of my execution. I went to the police. My waist still carried the raw marks of the rope. My knees still carried the bruises from the stones. I sat before the officer and told him the truth. I did not shout. I did not cry. I spoke calmly, describing how my son had tied me and dragged me. I showed the rope burns, the cuts, the proof of cruelty. The officer listened in silence, his face stern. When I finished, he nodded and said, "This is elder abuse. It is a crime. We will take action." Papers were written, reports filed, statements signed. The law had now heard my voice. I left the station feeling stronger than ever. My son thought I was too weak to fight back. But I had fought back, not with fists, but with law. Not with anger, but with truth. The execution of my decision was complete. His inheritance was gone, and his name was in the hands of the police. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt peace. My body still hurt, but my heart no longer carried the weight of humiliation. I had acted. I had secured my legacy. I had given my voice to the law. My son still laughed in ignorance, but soon his laughter would die. Soon he would face the truth, that the rope he used to drag me had tied his own fate. The day I walked into the police station, I felt like a different man. For many years, I had carried humiliation in silence. I told myself that patience was strength, that enduring cruelty was love. But that rope had changed everything. It was not just a rope around my waist, it was a rope around my dignity, my pride, my very existence as a father. I decided that silence would no longer protect me. Silence would only protect him, so I chose justice. The officer listened carefully as I told my story. My voice was steady, though my heart beat fast. I explained how my son had tied the rope around my waist and dragged me across the yard like an animal. I described the way he laughed while I lay helpless in the dirt. I showed the rope burns on my waist, red and raw, proof that I was not speaking empty words. I pulled up my trousers to reveal the bruises on my knees, dark purple and painful. Every mark on my body was a witness. The officer nodded slowly and said, "This is abuse. This is a crime. No son has the right to treat his father this way." They wrote down every detail. They asked me the date, the time, the place, the names of neighbors who might have seen. I gave them everything. I did not hold back. For once, I did not protect my son from the truth. For once, I let the world see him as he truly was, not a son, but an abuser. The officers promised to open a case. They said they would come to the house, speak to neighbors, gather evidence. My heart pounded, but I felt a calmness too. For so long, I had thought justice was out of reach for an old man like me. But that day, I realized that justice listens to those who dare to speak. And I had spoken. When I returned home, I sat quietly, waiting. My son still walked around with arrogance, bragging to his friends about the future he thought was his. He did not know that his name was already erased from my will. He did not know that the police were preparing to knock on his door. He laughed and mocked me, but I sat silently, knowing that his world was about to crumble. The next week, the police came. Their car pulled up outside, and neighbors peeked from behind their windows. The officers stepped out, uniforms sharp, voices firm. My son came to the door, confused, trying to act proud. But when they spoke his name, his pride faltered. They asked him questions. They told him about the complaint. They told him about the case of elder abuse. His face turned pale. His voice cracked. He looked around, hoping for support, but none came. Neighbors stood in silence, whispering to each other, their eyes cold. For the first time, my son tasted fear. He had dragged me across the yard in front of neighbors, laughing at my humiliation. Now those same neighbors watched as the police questioned him, watched as his arrogance drained away. Whispers spread quickly. The old man reported him. He abused his father, and now the police are here. The shame he had once forced onto me now fell on his shoulders. He turned to me, his voice trembling. "Father, tell them it's not true. Tell them you forgive me," but I stayed silent. I had already told my story where it mattered. I did not owe him my silence anymore. I did not owe him protection. He had chosen cruelty, and now he would face justice. The officers took statements from neighbors who admitted they had seen me being dragged. Some spoke of hearing his laughter. Some admitted they had looked away in shame. But their words added weight to the truth. My son was cornered, and he knew it. That night, when the officers left, his anger exploded. He shouted at me, cursed me, accused me of betrayal. "You are my father! How could you go to the police?" he screamed. I looked at him calmly and answered, "A father raises a son with love. But a son who ties a rope around his father is no son. You broke the bond. I only showed the truth." From that moment, his fear grew each day. Letters from the authorities arrived. He was called to answer for his actions. The case was real, and he could not escape it. His friends abandoned him, his pride was gone, and his nights were filled with worry. I would hear him pacing, muttering, begging the air for a way out. But there was none. The call to justice was more than police reports and papers. It was a turning point. For years, I had been dragged in silence, by his words, his laughter, his cruelty. But now, it was he who was dragged. Dragged into the light, dragged before the law, dragged into the shame of his own actions. The rope he once tied around my waist was now tied around his future. I felt no joy watching him suffer. I felt only peace. Peace that justice had finally spoken. Peace that my silence had ended. Peace that the law now carried the weight I had carried alone for so many years. The police case against my son spread through the town like fire in dry grass. People whispered in the market, in the streets, even outside the church. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew that a son had tied a rope around his father and dragged him across the yard like a beast. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others whispered, the old man was strong enough to stand up for himself. For once, I was not the one carrying the shame. It was my son who carried it now. The day the police came to serve him official papers was the day his pride died. They handed him documents, telling him he had to appear before the authorities to answer for elder abuse. His hands shook as he read the words. His friends who once laughed with him avoided his eyes. Neighbors stood outside their homes, watching as he lowered his head. The same man who had once dragged me now looked like he was the one being dragged by the weight of his own actions, dragged by the law, dragged by the truth he could no longer escape. He tried to argue. He shouted at the officers, saying it was a misunderstanding, saying I was exaggerating, saying I was too old to remember correctly. But the rope burns around my waist, the bruises on my knees, and the voices of neighbors were proof stronger than his lies. The officers listened but did not bend. They told him plainly, "This is serious. You will face the law." At home, he began to unravel. The arrogance that once filled his voice turned into fear. He no longer boasted about the land, the house, or the shop. He no longer bragged about the inheritance he thought was waiting for him. Instead, he whispered to himself at night, pacing the floor, pulling at his hair. He knew now that everything he counted on was slipping away. His friends abandoned him. The ones who once sat at our table, drinking and laughing at my expense, stopped coming. They did not want to be connected to a man facing charges. Even his wife grew distant. At first, she defended him, saying, "He is your son, forgive him." But as the news spread and the shame deepened, she began to look at him differently. She realized there would be no easy wealth, no bright future, no proud name to carry. One evening, she packed her bags and left with the children, her eyes filled with bitterness. She left him standing alone in the doorway, shouting her name, but she did not turn back. Debt soon followed. Without my support, without my shop, without my name, he struggled to survive. He had no savings, no property, no respect. The inheritance he thought was guaranteed had been given away to charities, neighbors, and honest workers. His hands were empty, his pockets shallow. He begged me, falling to his knees, tears in his eyes. "Father, please forgive me. Change the will. Save me from this." But his words were hollow. They were not born from love, but from fear. He did not weep for me. He wept for himself. The community looked at him with disgust. Neighbors who once respected him for being the son of a hard-working man now turned their backs. They said, "He tied a rope around his own father. If he can do that, he can do anything." People avoided him in the market. Old friends crossed the street to stay away. He was no longer seen as strong. He was seen as cruel, shameful, and weak. The court date arrived, and he stood trembling before the judge. His voice cracked as he tried to explain. He said it was a mistake, that he was only joking, that he did not mean harm. But the marks on my body, the reports from neighbors, the signed papers from the police told a different story. The judge's eyes were cold as he read the charges. My son stood there, stripped of pride, stripped of power, stripped of the future he thought was his. When the ruling came, it was clear. He was guilty of elder abuse. He would face punishment, fines, and shame that would follow him for years. His arrogance had led him to believe he was untouchable, but the law had proven otherwise. He walked out of that room a broken man, his head low, his eyes hollow. At home, the house felt different. For years, I had lived in silence, carrying the weight of his cruelty. Now, it was he who carried the silence. He could not meet my eyes. He could not speak with confidence. He sat in corners, muttering to himself, wondering how everything had gone wrong. But I knew the answer. Everything had gone wrong the moment he chose cruelty over respect, arrogance over gratitude, mockery over love. The fallout was complete. He had no inheritance, no family, no friends, no respect, and now no freedom. He had traded everything for one moment of laughter while dragging me across the yard, and that laughter had cost him his life as he knew it. In the end, I found my justice not in anger, not in revenge with fists, but in quiet strength and careful choices. My son had dragged me across the yard with a rope, thinking he had made me small. But in truth, he only revealed how small he was. He thought cruelty was power, but he learned that true power lies in dignity, in law, in decisions that cannot be undone. I did not need to strike him back. I did not need to shout or curse. My justice was written in papers, sealed by law, and carried by truth. I lived my days after that with calm. I woke in the mornings, drank my tea, sat in the sunlight, and listened to the birds. For the first time in many years, I felt peace in my own home. The air no longer carried the weight of his arrogance. The walls no longer echoed with his cruel laughter. Instead, there was silence, and in that silence, I found comfort. My legacy was safe. My future was decided. My heart was steady. The charities I had chosen received my help. I visited one of them quietly one day. I saw children eating warm meals with smiles on their faces. I saw workers bow their heads and thank me for even a small gift. In their eyes, I saw the respect that had long vanished from my sons. It was then I knew I had done the right thing. Better my life's work go to strangers who valued it than to blood that mocked it. My nephew worked hard in the shop I left him, his hands honest, his words humble. He carried my name with pride, not shame. That was justice too. My son, on the other hand, lived in disgrace. People no longer saw him as strong. They saw him as the man who abused his own father, the man cut out of the will, the man who lost everything. His arrogance was replaced by begging. His pride was replaced by shame. He walked the streets with eyes lowered, no longer boasting of wealth, no longer laughing at others. The police case stayed on his record, a shadow that would follow him for years. The inheritance he thought was his was gone forever, scattered into hands more worthy. Sometimes he came to me, his voice soft, his eyes watery. "Father, forgive me," he said. But forgiveness is not given with empty words. Forgiveness is built on respect, and he had buried respect in the dirt the day he tied that rope. I looked at him, calm and steady, and gave him no answer. My silence was my justice. My silence told him everything he needed to know. Neighbors who once pitied me now nodded with respect when they saw me. They said, "The old man was wise. He showed strength where many would have stayed weak." I did not feel proud. I only felt peace, because I had proven something not just to my son, but to myself, that even in old age, even with weak hands and a trembling body, I was not powerless. As long as I could choose, as long as I could speak truth, I still had strength. In the quiet of my evenings, I often sat in the yard where it all happened. I looked at the ground where I once lay humiliated, dragged by a rope. But now, I did not see shame. I saw victory, because that ground was where I rose from silence to justice. That rope, once a tool of cruelty, had become the symbol of his downfall. He tied me to humiliate me, but in truth, he tied himself to a future of emptiness. I whispered to myself as I watched the sunset. He thought he dragged me, but I cut the rope to his future, and those words gave me peace. In the end, my justice was not about making him suffer. It was about making sure my life's work, my sacrifices, my name, would not be wasted. It was about showing that cruelty cannot win, that arrogance cannot last, that disrespect cannot stand. My justice was to take his future away from him and give it to hands that valued it more. He tied a rope around me and dragged me like I was nothing, but I cut the rope to his future, forever.